There is a story from France. It's about a prisoner, a man whose name nobody knew. He spent decades locked away in some of the country's worst prisons, but he wasn't treated like a common criminal. He was given comfortable rooms, fine clothes, and good food. His jailer was under strict orders to provide for him, but also to ensure no one ever saw his face or heard his voice. He wore a mask. Not all the time, but whenever he might be seen. The legend says it was an iron mask, a heavy, cruel thing bolted to his head. This prisoner, France's most famous, has haunted history for over 300 years. His story is a whisper that turned into a roar. It's a real mystery, rooted in historical documents, but it grew into something much larger, a legend shaped by philosophers, revolutionaries, and novelists. The core question has always been the same. Who was the man in the iron mask? The answer is buried somewhere in the France of King Louis XIV, the Sun King. A time of absolute power, glittering courts, and very dark secrets. To understand the mystery, you have to start with what we actually know. The facts are few, and they come from official records, letters, and the journals of the men who guarded him. The story begins in 1669. A minister of the king, the Marquis de Louvois, sent a letter to the governor of a prison in a fortress called Pignerol. The governor's name was Benin d'Auvergne de Saint-Mars. He was a former musketeer, a man trusted with the state's most sensitive prisoners. Louvois's letter told Saint Mars to expect a new prisoner, a man named Eustache Daguerre. The instructions were specific and chilling. Saint Mars was to prepare a cell with multiple doors, one closing on top of the other to prevent anyone from listening in. He was told to see this prisoner only once a day to deliver food, and he was to warn Daguerre that if he ever spoke of anything other than his immediate needs, he would be killed instantly. This was not a normal prisoner, this was a man who needed to be erased from the world. For years, Eustache Daguerre remained in Pignerol. Saint Mars followed his orders perfectly. The prisoner was kept in extreme isolation. At the same time, Pignerol housed other important political prisoners. One was Nicolas Fouquet, the king's former finance minister, who was arrested for embezzlement and ambition. Another was the Count de Lauzun, a nobleman who had angered the king over a romantic affair. For a time, it seems Daguerre was permitted to act as a valet for Fouquet, who was old and sick. This is a strange detail. Why would a man whose secrets were so dangerous be allowed to serve another prisoner? Perhaps the secret was not something he would speak of, but something about his identity itself. St. Mars was a career jailer, and his career was tied to this mysterious prisoner. Wherever St. Mars was promoted, the prisoner went with him. In 1681, St. Mars was made governor of a fortress at Exilies. He took the prisoner with him, transported in a covered chair so no one could see him. Then, in 1687, another move. St. Mars was appointed governor of the prison on the island of Sainte Marguerite, just off the coast of Cannes. The prisoner went too. It was here that the legend of the mask really began to take shape. An officer at the fortress later recalled seeing the prisoner walking on the battlements. He described a man wearing a mask of steel. Finally, in 1698, St. Mars was given the most prestigious post of his career governor of the Bastille in Paris. The Bastille was the symbol of royal power, the place where the king sent enemies who were to disappear without a trial. St. Mars arrived in Paris with his prisoner in tow. An eyewitness described their arrival. The prisoner sat in a litter. He was a tall man, with gray hair. He wore a mask not of iron, but of black velvet. The guards had orders to kill him if he removed it. The prisoner lived in the Bastille for 5 years. He was treated well. He was given books and allowed to play the lute. The prison's doctor, who treated him, said he never complained and was a devout man. But he was never seen without his mask. The doctor said he observed the prisoner's skin and lips, but was never allowed to see his full face. On November 19th, 1703, the prisoner died. He had felt unwell after attending Mass. He died quickly. He was buried the next day in the St. Paul Cemetery in Paris. On the death register, he was given a name Marchioli. He was listed as being about 45 years old. This age was almost certainly a guess or a fabrication. After his death, St. Mars's orders were to destroy everything that had belonged to the man. His clothes, his bed, his furniture, it was all burned. The walls of his cell were scraped down and whitewashed. The tiles on the floor were torn up. Anything that might hold a hidden message, a secret clue to his identity, was obliterated. So those are the facts. A man arrested in 1669 moved with his jailer St. Mars from Pignerol to Exilies to Sainte Marguerite and finally to the Bastille. Kept in high security but treated with respect. His face was always hidden by a mask. He died in 1703 and was buried under a false name. The state went to extreme lengths to erase him from existence. These events are the bones of the story, but the flesh, the thing that made it a legend, was added by others. The first and most important was the writer and philosopher Voltaire. In 1751, he published his great history, The Age of Louis XIV. In it, he told the story of the masked prisoner. Voltaire had been imprisoned in the Bastille himself years earlier, and he had heard the stories from older guards and officials. He was the one who popularized the idea that the mask was made of iron. He described it as a sophisticated device with steel springs at the jaw, allowing the man to eat without taking it off. This image of a man encased in metal was powerful and cruel. It stuck. Voltaire didn't know the prisoner's name, but he claimed to know the secret. He dismissed the idea that the prisoner was some minor figure. Why go to such incredible lengths for a nobody? The prisoner, Voltaire argued, had to be someone of immense importance. He was young when arrested, tall, and well-built. He was treated with deference. An official once saw the man drop a silver plate from his cell window. A fisherman picked it up and brought it to the governor. The governor asked the fisherman, "Have you read what is written on it? Can you read?" The fisherman said he couldn't. Only after being convinced the man was illiterate did the governor let him go, saying, "It is lucky for you that you cannot read." Voltaire concluded that there was only one possible explanation. The man in the iron mask was the older, illegitimate brother of King Louis XIV himself. Or, even more explosively, he was Louis XIV's twin brother. This was a bombshell. The idea of a hidden twin brother was pure political dynamite. In France, the firstborn son inherited the throne. If Louis XIV had an identical twin born just moments before or after him, it could throw the entire line of succession into chaos. Who was the rightful king? To prevent a civil war, the story went one of the twins was hidden away from birth, raised in secret. When he grew up and discovered his identity, he had to be imprisoned for life. His face had to be hidden because it was the exact same face as the king. Voltaire's theory was brilliant. It explained the extreme secrecy, it explained the respectful treatment, it explained the mask, and it was a massive attack on the absolute monarchy. It suggested the foundation of the king's power was built on a lie, a crime against his own brother. In the years leading up to the French Revolution, this story became a potent symbol of royal tyranny and injustice. The man in the Iron Mask was the ultimate victim of a cruel, secretive regime. The revolution came and went, the Bastille was stormed and torn down. Revolutionaries searched the prison records hoping to find the answer. They found nothing conclusive. The secret had been kept too well. Then, in the 19th century, another great French writer picked up the story, Alexandre Dumas. In his novel, The Vicomte de Bragelonne, the last part of his D'Artagnan romances, Dumas took Voltaire's theory and turned it into one of the most famous adventure stories ever written. In his version, the prisoner is Philippe, the identical twin of Louis XIV. The aging musketeers, Aramis and Porthos, plot to switch the brothers, putting Philippe on the throne. The plot fails, and the real king imprisons his twin, forcing him to wear an iron mask for the rest of his days. Dumas's book made The Man in the Iron Mask a household name across the world. His fictional account became so famous that many people accepted it as fact. The image of the noble, wronged twin suffering in a mask became the definitive version of the story. But it was just that, it was a story. Historians have been picking at this mystery for centuries. They have sifted through letters, archives, and prison records. They have come up with a long list of candidates. Each one has a compelling story, and each one has problems. The twin brother theory is the most romantic, but it's almost certainly false. There is absolutely no historical evidence that Louis XIV's mother, Anne of Austria, gave birth to twins. A royal birth was a very public event, witnessed by dozens of courtiers to prevent exactly this kind of thing, a baby being switched, or a secret one hidden away. The idea that a twin could have been born and smuggled out without anyone knowing is practically impossible. It's great fiction, but it's not history. Another candidate once considered was an Italian diplomat named Count Ercole Antonio Mattioli. In the 1670s, Mattioli was involved in secret negotiations to sell a key fortress to France. He took a bribe from Louis XIV, then double-crossed him by revealing the secret to other European powers. The Sun King was furious. French agents kidnapped Mattioli on Italian soil and threw him in prison. He was held in Pignerol, the same prison as our mystery man. And the name on the Bastille death certificate, Marsholi, looks a lot like Mattioli. For a long time, this seemed like a promising theory. The crime was serious enough to warrant a long imprisonment. The names were similar, but there are major problems. Mattioli's imprisonment was not a total secret. Many people in Italy knew what had happened to him. He was allowed to communicate with other prisoners. He was not kept in the kind of absolute isolation that the masked man was. Also, St. Mars, the jailer, complained about Mattioli constantly, calling him a liar and a scoundrel. This doesn't match the descriptions of the masked prisoner as a quiet, respectful man. Finally, records show Mattioli died in 1694, almost a decade before the man in the Bastille. So, Mattioli is out. What about Nicolas Fouquet, the disgraced finance minister? He was one of the most powerful men in France before his spectacular downfall. He was arrested by D'Artagnan himself and imprisoned for life in Pignerol. The official story is that he died there in 1680. But some have suggested that his death was faked. Perhaps the king wanted to move him in secret to make sure he could never again communicate with the outside world. Fouquet certainly knew many state secrets that could embarrass the king. This theory, too, falls apart under scrutiny. Fouquet's death was witnessed by his family and other prisoners. His funeral was held. There is no real evidence that he lived beyond 1680, and why would they wait until he was an old man to put him in a mask and move him? The timeline doesn't fit. The man who arrived at Pignerol in 1669 was a new prisoner, not an old one being rebranded. There are other, more outlandish theories. Was he an illegitimate son of the king? Or the son of some other powerful noble? Was he an English nobleman involved in a plot against his own king? Some have even suggested he was the playwright Moliere, supposedly imprisoned by jealous rivals. These are fun to think about, but they have no basis in the historical record. They are pure speculation. This brings us back to the very beginning, back to that letter from 1669. The letter that named the prisoner, Eustache Doger. Most modern historians who have studied the case believe that the man in the iron mask was, in fact, this man, Eustache Doger. The name fits the timeline perfectly. The instructions given for his imprisonment match the extreme secrecy surrounding the masked man. The problem is we have no idea who Eustache Doger was or what he did. His name appears in the arrest order and a few letters, and then vanishes. He seems to have been a nobody, but that's the point. The secret was not who he was, but what he knew. The crime wasn't his, but someone else's. Eustache Doger was likely a valet, a servant, a minor player who stumbled upon a secret so dangerous that he had to be erased. What could the secret be? There are a few possibilities. One theory connects him to the downfall of Nicolas Fouquet. Perhaps Doger was a valet who knew the real details of Fouquet's financial dealings, details that might also incriminate the king himself or other high-ranking officials. Or maybe he knew about a secret treaty, a political assassination, or a scandalous affair at court. Another compelling theory connects Doger to a scandal known as the Affair of the Poison. In the late 1670s, a wave of paranoia swept through the French aristocracy. Accusations of witchcraft, black magic, and murder by poison were everywhere. The investigation reached the highest levels of the court, even touching the king's official mistress. It was a massive scandal that Louis XIV wanted to shut down and cover up. What if Eustache Doger was a minor figure who knew too much about the involvement of some very important people in this affair? That would be a reason to lock him up and throw away the key. This nobody who knew too much theory is the most plausible. It explains why he was kept in such secrecy, but not treated with the deference you would show a royal. He was just a man, a vessel for a dangerous piece of information. The order to kill him if he spoke makes sense in this context. It wasn't his life that was important, it was his silence. But if he was just a valet, why the mask? A common servant's face would not be recognizable to anyone. The mask seems excessive. This is where the story gets a bit more complex. The famous mask, the one Voltaire called iron and others saw as velvet, might not have been a permanent fixture. It was likely only worn during transport, when there was a chance he might be seen by soldiers or strangers. In the isolation of his cell, he probably did not wear it. The purpose of the mask was not to hide a famous face. It was to dehumanize him. It was a tool of psychological control. It stripped him of his identity. It was a constant physical reminder that he was no longer a person. He was a secret. The mask, combined with the total isolation, was designed to break a man, to ensure he never even thought of speaking his secret aloud, not even to himself. It turned him from a man into an object, the king's secret. The man at the center of the story, whether he was Doger or someone else, lived an almost unimaginable life. For over 30 years, he was moved from prison to prison. He saw the world only through a small window or from the top of a fortress wall. His only human contact was with his jailer, a man who was both his provider and his potential executioner. He had books, food, and a musical instrument, but he was denied the one thing that makes us human: a name, a face, a story. In the end, we will probably never know for sure. The French monarchy was incredibly effective at keeping its secrets. The documents that could have solved the mystery were likely destroyed centuries ago. All we have are fragments, whispers, and the giant legend that grew out of them. The Man in the Iron Mask remains France's greatest historical mystery for a reason. The story works on so many levels. It's a detective story, with clues and red herring. It's a political thriller about the dark side of absolute power. It's a human tragedy about a life stolen and erased. The identity of the man himself has almost become secondary. The legend is what matters. The Man in the Iron Mask is a symbol. He is the unknown political prisoner. He is the person who is silenced by the state. He is the individual crushed by a system that values its own secrets more than a human life. He represents the fear of being forgotten, of having your identity stripped away until you are nothing but a man in a mask. The story persists because it asks a timeless question. What is the worst thing you can do to a person? Is it to kill them? Or is it to let them live but take away everything that makes them who they are? The man in the iron mask was allowed to live, but he was not allowed to exist. He was a ghost in the machine of the French state, a walking secret kept alive only as long as he remained silent and faceless. That is why we are still talking about him. We don't have the answer to who was he. But the story forces us to confront a more profound question. What does it mean to be a person? The prisoner in the mask, whoever he was, lost his name, his voice, and his face. But in doing so, he gained a strange kind of immortality. He became a legend, a blank space in history that we continue to fill with our own fears and fascinations about power, identity, and injustice. He is the man who was meant to be forgotten, instead became unforgettable.